Hello everybody, welcome back to CSS3 in 30 days. Today's day number 22. We're going to be playing around with some Flexbox. Now, back in day 9, we used CSS to create some modern layouts. Essentially what we're going to do today is create those exact same modern layouts, but instead of using floats and clears and margins and math, we're going to be using Flexbox. And I'm going to show you how incredibly easy it is to create layouts with Flexbox. Now, bear in mind, Flexbox is a relatively new technology and not a fully supported totally across the board, but it's pretty darn good, and you can use your discretion on where you want to use it. Of course, caniuse.com is a great website to see which properties and values, those combinations, which of those are more widely supported, so you can use your own discretion, and you can always use fallbacks as well. Other thing I wanted to let you know is Flexbox is a large area of study. It's not just a quick little property or a quick little style. There's actually a lot to it, and I don't want to cover the massive amount of theory involved in Flexbox. I'm going to give you a really great resource. In fact, it's actually my favorite coding blog is CSS-Tricks by Chris Coyier, and he has got the complete guide to Flexbox, and I've referred to this on numerous occasions when making my own Flexbox layouts and websites. So, and as you can see, it's last updated on November 12th, which at the time of this recording was only about 15 days ago. So he's always updating this, and I love this article that he's put together, this guide. It gives you the background on Flexbox and the basics and terminology and all the properties and everything that you would ever need to know about Flexbox. It's really great and a great practice. So part of my homework for this lesson would be to, whether you want to do it before or after we make some layouts, is head over to css-tricks.com/snippets/ you know what, I'm just going to put the link up on the screen here, and just Google CSS Tricks Flexbox as well. That'll get you there. I'll put it up on the screen, whatever you need to do to get there. So check that out. Credit to Chris Coyier for that. So let's get back to it. What is Flexbox? Flexbox is essentially a relatively new technology. Since 2009 and onward, there's been multiple iterations of Flexbox, but basically it's an easy way to create layouts so that you don't have to use floats and clears and all that sort of stuff. It makes creating layouts and sidebars and organization of content incredibly easy, incredibly streamlined, naturally responsive. Of course, you can modify it and customize it in whatever way you wish. And when you see how easy it is to create some simple and modern layouts, you're going to wonder why you didn't use Flexbox before. Now, before you just jump on the Flexbox train, remember, you need to do your homework and your due diligence to make sure you're not creating a production-ready client site that's only based on certain Flexbox properties that may not be cross-browser compatible. So do your homework. Let's jump in and show you what we got. So day number 22, Flexbox layouts, the same layout organization as the day number 9 for modern layouts. And down in the final result, you can see the layouts. We got header, article, aside, footer, basic layout, content, and sidebar. Number 2, we got the logo and the navigation and a header with 2 sidebars, an article in the middle. Flexbox layout number 3, essentially the same header here, but the logo's on the right. We got 3 equally sized articles in a 3-column grid within a main content, and then a footer. So that's really it. And let's jump in to our code editor. See what we got. Day number 22, Flexbox layouts. Go ahead and download that. Come back to this and let's get started. In here, we got some basic markup. We got the sandbox is what we're going to be playing around with. And each layout is within a section tag with the class of layout 1, 2, and 3, respectively. We have headers, a main content with articles and asides, footers. It's very semantic, straightforward, simple HTML5. And of course, final.css is there for your reference to help you out if you have any issues. Of course, keep in mind that every class for the final result is prepended with final _, whereas we're just going to be using the classes called layout 1, 2, and 3. And the reason why I do that is so that those styles don't conflict, so that the final the final result doesn't conflict with the sandbox. So let's jump in. Now keep in mind, this isn't going to be a theory lesson. So if you've never heard of Flexbox before, certain parts of this might be a little over your head. So giving you a fair warning right now, I'll do my best to explain certain things, But I do recommend you read that Chris Coyier guide on Flexbox. Should take you about 15-20 minutes or so, just so you can understand what's going on when we start playing around with some properties you've maybe never heard of before. Layout 1, main. We're selecting the main tag within layout 1. We're going to tell it display flex. So instead of like inline or block, we're going to say flex. And that's going to tell everything within the main content in that main tag to be aware that this is a flex item, this flex container. And the flex direction is going to allow us to tell the browser how to display the direction of the content. So in Bootstrap, we use things like div with the class of row. Well, in Flexbox, we just simply use flex direction and we can say row. So we don't actually have to like create another tag in HTML to do essentially just this. So we're going to tell it that the main content container is actually going to be a row. It's going to contain a row. And you can also do things like row reverse to reverse the order of the elements. So if you have 1, 2, 3, you can actually say row reverse and it will actually go 3, 2, 1. So I might show you an example of that after. So that's it we have to do for that. Nothing's going to happen yet. We're going to say layout 1 and then article. So in this element, we have an article and an aside. Now to make that article fit a certain amount, 3/4-ish of the width, and the sidebar be on the side with a smaller amount of width, all we're going to do is say flex, and this is a shorthand property. I believe it's flex, grow, shrink, and basis. Kind of like when you write border and it has, solid 1 pixel red. That's a shorthand for 3 different properties. So I'm just going to say flex 1. Now, what this says is any articles within the layout element, the layout class, have them all take up the exact same amount of space. So that's going to make a lot of sense when we get to layout number 3, when we've got 3 identically sized articles. If I were to say flex 1 or say flex 2, the article will try to take up twice as much space as the other elements within the flex container. So this one's just going to take up the same amount of space as every other article or element that is within that content. So let me just show you. If I just say flex 1, let's see what happens. So you can see that it just automatically created 2 50% width elements. Not because I said 50%, but because I said flex 1, the article will take up the same amount of space as the other elements within that container. Now, if I say flex 2, it's not going to do anything because the other element, the aside, doesn't actually have a flex property styled on top of it. So if we just went down here and said layout 1 aside, and then said flex 1, and then save that, you can see now that the article is twice the size as the aside. Now, you might be wondering, okay, but those are really fixed sizes. What if I don't want it to just always be 2 times the width or 3 times the width? What if I want to fine tune that? Well, you actually can do that quite easily. So I'm going to remove aside here and just style the article. I'm going to say flex 1 as a basis, and I'm going to say 58%. Now this is essentially, this value is going to tell it the width, the maximum width, and that's not technically maximum width, but it's the space that you want it to take up. So you can kind of override that 1-to-1 ratio and then refresh. Now it's taking 58% of the width of that container. Now what I find interesting is if I were to change this to 50%, it's going to go to its regular 50% width, but if I were to go to 100%, it's not going to actually fill it out 100% because Flexbox knows that there's still a container there, so it's not going to push it down. It still needs to fit within there. So this is roughly, I don't really know, it looks like it's around 75%, so I'm not really entirely sure of the reason why it does that, but it's kind of smart. So I'm going to go back to my 58% width space there. Now the problem is these are jammed up against one another, so I want a little bit of space. So all I'm going to say here is just margin right 2%, and that will give it some space. And it doesn't make the aside tag fall down or anything like that. It just automatically distributes the width so that both of these elements can live happily ever after within its flex parent. Now, if I were to say flex direction row reverse, it's going to reverse these. As you can see, now the aside is on the left and the article is on the right, despite the way I've coded the markup. which is really neat. This would take a lot more to style in CSS. And would be there's a little bit of hackery going on there if I was trying to do that in just floats and clears and so on and so forth. So row reverse is a nice value for flex direction. But I'm going to put it back to here, and that's it for the first layout. That's all we had to do. Now, if I had to do this in just floats and clears, if I had to do math, and I would have had things collapsing, and it would have been a little bit stressful and confusing. Now, that's not to diminish how much is going on here. There's a lot going on with the shorthand property. I encourage you to read about it and test it and play around with it. But you can see how exciting this is when creating layouts. So let's jump into layout number 2. And we're going to say layout to header. We're going to say display flex, of course, flex direction. This is something that you're going to often be writing, these two things. Row, and then within there, we're going to say layout 2, header, and then nav. So we're selecting something more specific. We're going to say flex 1. Save that, and let's see what happens so far. So you can see now that they're both jammed up. Kind of, it's what's happening is that Flexbox is only taking the calculating the widths based on the content within the container itself for the most part. It's kind of like an inline block, so to speak. That's why we have to use additional properties to space them out and tell Flexbox how much space we want distributed between the elements. So I'm going to go down here and say layout 2, header, nav, and I'm going to say flex 1, flex, and then 1. And so that changes it to take up the entire amount of its space that's available for it. As you can see, it just did. It filled out almost like 100% of its available space. And I'm going to say margin left to give it some space. I'm going to do 2% again, and that'll give it space. So just like that, I've created that simple layout like that. Now I want to move down to the main element. So layout to main. So I'm selecting that main tag. And I'm going to say display flex, flex direction, of course, and you guessed it, row. And now I'm going to say layout to article. So now I'm selecting the article within there. Now keep in mind there are also 2 asides on either side of the element. I'm going to say flex and 1. Now if I just did that, let's see what happens. Now everything here, it's very interesting what's going on here. Let me just take the flex 1 out of there and let's see what happens now that I told it to be a flex element, the main container here. The aside on the left is this size. The article on the middle is this size, so a bit bigger, quite a bit bigger. And then the article on the right side, the aside on the right side is quite a bit smaller because there's less content. So all this is being intelligently calculated as best as it possibly can by Flexbox to try and automatically size the elements based on it just being a flex element. But I want to override that and tell it to be specific. So I'm going to say flex for the article. I'm going to say 1. Let's see what that does. Nothing good because based on the other 2 flex elements, it starts making things wonky, which is why we want to start adding some percentages here. So I'm going to say 56%. And that's going to give it 56% of its available, of the available space for it. Now, the problem here is these asides are throwing off this element here. I don't want it to be like this. So let me just first give it some margin. So I'm going to say margin, let's go 0 and 2% on the left and right. Okay, so the space on the bottom here, I don't really want that. So I'm not going to write a shorthand. I'm going to say margin left, 2%, margin right, 2%. That should keep it. There we go. The other nice thing about Flexbox is, do you notice how these elements are maintaining the same height as the article? How the aside, despite this only having this much content, is still this long, which is as long as the article, which is as long as the other aside. That's the other cool thing. So if you wanted a background like on these elements to maintain the same height as the growing content, it's very easily and automatically done without you having to do anything in Flexbox. So that's cool. So let's move on down to fix those asides because I don't like how they look. Layout 2, aside, side nav, and the side bar. Now, if I just say flex 1, so they fit their available space. Let's see what that does. So now things are looking weird because now I have these looking way too small. But I can override that and say 20%. So each of those are going to fit about the 20% of its available content. Just like that. Now they are identical widths with space in between the article. And just like that, I've coded up this beautiful 3-column multi-width layout just using a couple selectors here. So that's really cool. Now let's move down to layout number 3. Now what we're going to say layout 3 header. That's going to be display flex again, of course. And then flex direction row reverse is what we're going to do. Play around with it a little bit. Now let's say layout 3 header, and we're going to select that nav. We're going to tell it to be flex of 1. And let's see what that does. And you can see that the logo is on the right because we said row reverse. If I just said row, that logo is on the left side, but I want it on the right. I don't change the markup at all, the order of the markup. I'm just using Flexbox to tell it where to go. I want a little bit of space, however. Let's say margin right from that nav, 2%. Let's keep everything within the same percentage convention. Okay, and now let's play with those articles. I'm going to say layout 3 and the class of articles, which is the wrapper around the 3 articles. There's a div with the class of articles. And I'm going to say display flex and then flex direction row. Then we're going to say layout 3 article. We're selecting each individual article like this. Flex 1, save that. And now each of these 3 articles have the exact same, they take the exact same amount of space because they are the same element. And they have a flex of 1. But I want some space between them, so I'm going to say margin 0 and 2% on the left and right. Now they all have margin 0, 2% on the left and right. Problem is I don't want that on the first element on the left side, and I don't want it on the last element on the right side. It's a little bit of simple CSS trickery here. CSS3 trickery rather. Layout 3, article, first child, and article, last child. Simply going to say margin 0. I want no margin on those specific styles, elements. And there it is right there. Now it's equally distributed with some 2% margin in between. Love it. Okay, so now let's just do some simple responsive, like a simple responsive fallback. Because right now everything's just going to flex, hence Flexbox, and we'll always retain that layout. Problem with that is that doesn't look good. So all we're going to do here is have some simple fallbacks here. Let's say responsive fallback, and we're going to say media, screen, and max width 768 pixels, pretty standard width for, well, phones are getting so large now that that's probably the tiniest iPhone's portrait. But really that is the landscape of iPhones and similar sized devices. It's not based on the physical size of the device, it's based on the pixel size and the pixel ratio within that. Because we have retina screens and everything, and it gets confusing. When responsive media queries first came out and screens were very simple, it was quite easy, but responsive media queries have started to get a little bit more complicated with the rise of high resolution screens. Anyway, I digress. Let's make these things vertically stack when you get to 768 max width. So we're simply just going to select all of the article, let's put this all in one line, article, aside, header, and we also have logo, we have side nav. I'm just taking all the styles, all the elements that we styled, and sidebar, and we also have articles. Whoops. That is all of the elements that we've used. Those are all the elements we've used. And we're going to say display block, so no longer flex, float none, width 100%, margin 0, 0, 2% on the bottom, so everything stacks and has some space. That's it. So let's see what happens when we go down to 768 or less. No dice. And the reason why is because these are not specific enough selectors. So each of these need to have, I could just say important, 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 but that's lazy. I'm going to have to write more specific styles within here. So bear with me. I'm going to write a layout 1, 2, and 3 styles for every single one of these elements. So I'm going to fast forward this, but you will do the same. All right, there it is. Layout 1, main, article aside, layout 2, header, blah, 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 blah. Every selector that we did, I'm just reselecting them there because I'm just going to make them all do the same thing. Refresh. Now, if I go to resize this to 768 or less, bam, they all vertically stack just like that. Nice and simple fallback solution. And that, my friends, is it for today's little sample of modern layouts with Flexbox. I hope you enjoyed it. I was excited to share this one with you. And as for that article, make sure you check out Chris Coyer's Complete Guide to Flexbox. I'm going to put that link up here on the screen, and go ahead and read through that, play around with it right here within your sandbox, and see what you can understand about Flexbox. It's really amazing. Don't be afraid if you feel like it's new and you don't really know if you can learn anything new or if it's complicated. Trust me, spend some time, you'll figure it out, and it will be worth it. See you tomorrow on day number 23. Bye now.